this afternoon for this talk on his new book titled Industrial Policy and the Transformation of the Colonial Economy in Africa, the Zambian Experience, which is published by Routledge. The book situates the importance of industrial policy and specifically frontier industrial policy, which I'm sure he'll talk to this afternoon, within the country context of Zambia and the enduring colonial legacy in the country's economic structure. And it provides a masterful account of the economic history of the selected aspects of the Zambian economy, the challenges of structural transformation and possibilities of industrial policy. Horman is a professor of African Studies at the Center for African Studies at UCT, and he also has a range of other affiliations, including that he's a visiting research fellow in the Global Justice Program at Yale University, a research associate at PRISM at UCT, and a visiting fellow at the African Studies Center at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. He has a PhD in development studies from the University of Natal, and his research interests include agrarian political economy, hydropolitics, and alternative strategies for economic growth in Africa. Horman really publishes prolifically, and in addition to this book that he'll be talking to this afternoon, a couple of his other recent books include one titled Industrializing Africa, Unlocking the Economic Potential of the Continent, another volume titled Social Welfare Policy in South Africa, and a third one titled Economic Growth and Development in Africa, Understanding Trends and Prospects. Horman, thanks for being with us, and we're really looking forward to the talk on your new book. We're also delighted to have with us Dr. Judith Fessehaie, who will be offering some remarks as a discussant after Horman's talk. Judith is the Senior Program Officer at the International Trade Center in Geneva. The ITC is a joint agency of UNCTAD and the WTO. And in this capacity, she manages projects related to trade policy and women's economic empowerment at the global and regional levels. She also looks at gender disaggregated data collection and analysis and technical support to national trade and trade-related policy reforms. Judith has also worked for a number of years on the Zambian economy, and she retains an interest in that. Prior to joining ITC, Judith managed the Trade and Development Program at a leading Geneva-based think tank, and has also in the past worked at Tregenna, at UJ, at Trademark Southern Africa, at Zambia's Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry, and the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, as well as having previously taught here at UJ. So welcome to both of you. Thanks for making time for this. And we're going to start this afternoon with Horman's talk on some of the key ideas of the book, followed by Judith's remarks. And then we'll be opening for Q&A or for discussion. And people will be able to either post questions or comments in the chat, or we can enable people to speak. I think it will be nice to have quite an interactive session. So let me leave it there, and over to you, Horman.
Thank you, Fiona, for inviting me to speak about the book. And this is a second book that I'm launching under your chair. So I am I'm grateful that you've given me an opportunity to do this. And of course, the book is slightly old. So it was published at the beginning of last year. And so we thought that the best way is to not to do a book launch, but to talk about the book and see whether we can and see what points of discussion we can draw from the book. And so what I would do, I've prepared a couple of slides that I want to speak to, which is actually unconventional for a book. It's not a book launch, so I'm talking to the book, so I'll speak to some of the slides that I've prepared, and after that, then Judith will come in with a comment. So to start with, in the book I make two key arguments. The first one is that the colonial economy is still alive in Africa today. And I use the Zambian case to illustrate the features of the colonial economy that are still alive. The second argument I make is that since the colonial economy was not constructed for the benefit of Africans, if it's still alive today, we need to transform it for Africans to benefit from economic activities on the continent. Yeah, so that's the logic I follow. And I argue also that industrial policy can be an instrument for decolonizing or for decentering what I call the colonial economic logic. And industrial policy, and here I'm a little bit specific to say that it's not any kind of industrial policy that can help us decenter this colonial economic logic, which has actually persisted up to now. If my argument is clear, then if it's true that we still have the colonial economy or features of that economy still alive in African economies today, then we need tools for transforming that. But it's not just any kind of industrial policy. I'm speaking of a specific type of industrial policy that I'm calling a frontier industrial policy, and I'll speak to some of the components of that. And so what I do in the presentation is just to highlight some of the surviving features of the colonial economy to support my argument that the colonial economy still exists, or features of it are still alive today in African economies. And using the Zambian experience is perhaps not a very good thing, because in terms of the colonial economy, Zambia might be an outlier in the sense that it was colonial economy par excellence. In the sense that its features, depicts, or at that time, even now, one could argue, as the strongest feature of the colonial economy. So perhaps it's not, but we can see some of these features in other countries as well, including for slightly restructured economies like South Africa. You can see some of the aspects or features of that colonial economy as we speak to that. So first of all, I think to start with is I think the starting point is to understand the colonial economic logic, which again is at the heart of it is the French philosophy of mise en valeur. And for those of you who speak French, there is the premier French colonial philosopher, Albert Sarrou. There's a French version of what he said there. That's exactly what the philosophy or the policy of mise en valeur was about. There's an English translation in blue there for those of us who are not very privileged to read and speak French. But the basic point there is that there was this idea that Africans don't recognize the value of what they have. So we've got to go there and realize this value for ourselves. And here you can give credit to Albert Sarrou, because he does acknowledge that it's for ourselves in the first place. So it's for the French. The value that's realized in Africa is for the French in the first place. And then, according to him, for the rest of humanity. And that's a logic. That whatever the colonial economy set up here was set up to realize value, or to create value, or to add value to whatever was here, but that value to the benefit of people outside of the continent. There is a quote there also about, specifically, what that meant, that they had to come and look for raw materials which were, used to feed into the, blossoming industrial activities in Europe at that time. 1870, for instance. It's not coincidental that after that, there was a partition of Africa and the setting up of colonial regimes. Yeah, so that's the logic, and we'll see that the setting up of this, the initial idea, was not to benefit Africans. If Africans benefited, it was an externality, a positive externality, as one would say. But in the first place, it was to benefit the colonizing powers. And this is why, if we are going to, this is why we need to transform the economy so that they can be restructured to be able to benefit Africans. Otherwise, if we continue with the same structure, the benefit will continue to escape out of the continent. Right, now, in terms of what is this, what are the features of a colonial economy? Just for me to, I need to support my argument I made at the beginning that the colonial economy is alive. And one of the, perhaps the most visible of this colonial economy is the graph you're seeing there. Now, this of course comes from the UNCTAD Commodity Dependency Report to 2019. Well, there's several years, but you know, the latest one is 2019. And you can see here showing the commodity dependency, you know, by country. You have there, you know, countries like Algeria, Angola, up to almost over 90% of export dependent on commodities. And you can see a majority of the countries there, South Africa slightly above 50 there, and so on. And it's overwhelming that, and this is not by accident, that you have, you know, almost the entire continent so dependent on commodities. That's the way the economies were set up. They were set up to export commodities. So, and this is 2019. You know, I mean the different years, 2009, 2014, and 2019. So this feature is still there. That you can take any economy and analyze it, you will see that it's there's high level of commodity dependence. In terms of region, again, you know, some region more dependent, like Central Africa and West Africa, others slightly less, but compared to others, for instance, Southeast Asia, Central America, and the Caribbean, slightly lower than what the average would be for the continent. This is also another map that is giving us a sense of, if we look globally in terms of commodity dependency, we see there that overwhelming number of countries on the continent with that dark blue color. They have a, you know, their export almost between 80 and 100% of exports are made up of commodities. Again, that is not by accident, and the fact that it's continuing today is a clear sign that we still have features of a colonial economy quite alive and kicking today. There's this graph also that presents a little bit more detail on that, but it's the same thing. And perhaps the left extreme, the right extreme column there, an export concentration index, does tell the story that majority of them, that you have a high concentration of export within the commodities. And also in some cases, only one or two commodities. For instance, Angola, one commodity makes up more than 75% of total export earnings. Botswana 4, Burundi 2, Chad, and so on. I mean, of course, for countries like Kenya, South Africa, there's a little bit of diversity there, but still there is dependency on commodities. So that perhaps is well established. The second feature of the colonial economy that has survived up to now, and we can see this in a lot more countries, that's related to the first one, is the lack of internal coherence. So coherency here means, in practical terms, that there is more stronger linkages between different sectors in the economy. or put it in another way, that there's a bit of complementarity between different sectors. In most African countries, that complementarities are weak, and in most cases, the economy are what we refer to as disarticulated, with weak linkages. Specifically because when you extract commodities, they have to be processed elsewhere. In a more coherent economy, you will have industries that process those resources to a certain extent, and to create sub-industries that feed into other industries. But if you are lifting the tea leaves from Uganda to be processed in Belgium, there are no auxiliary industries around the tea value chain within Uganda. And that's the lack of coherency in the system. And of course, I mean, perhaps the classic example of a discussion of this is Albert Hirschman speaks about financial linkages, consumption linkages, and production linkages that we can speak of. All those are weak in most African countries. The lack of internal coherence also can be seen in terms of the infrastructure, and there I have the railway station that that have survived up to today. That's Nigeria, and then Zambia and the DRC. In terms of Nigeria is a little bit, you have a couple of lines there that are crisscrossing, so a little bit better. Zambia, you have only 2 lines. The other one was developed after independence. The runs from central Zambia to Dar es Salaam, but there is one that links down to South Africa through Vic Falls. That was the main one that was constructed, but the lines are not so coherent. This comes out perhaps more in the DRC case, that if you see there are some standalone lines that are not connected to anything, and that's also a sign of a colonial economy, because it was haphazardly put together, particularly focusing on the extraction of those natural resources, and there was no coherent logic in that. This map actually does give a picture. This is a picture that's giving an overall of the railway network on the continent, and you can see that there's no coherency in there. You have a couple of them that are linked, but particularly in the southern part. But the east not linked with the west, the north not linked with the south and central. You've got some that are, that's also the colonial infrastructure map. And unfortunately, this still exists today. It hasn't been transformed. The other feature that shows us the survival of the colonial economy is the dualism. And the dualistic structure, here can be seen at different levels. There's spatial dualism, the rural and urban. The gap between those in many aspects is still big, as it was in the colonial times. There is the formal and informal, though those dualism are more pronounced on the continent today, just as they were during colonial times. There's the modern sector and the subsistence sector, for instance. The differences are big, but also in terms of the social structure, that you have a small section of the people that have, high income, and then the majority of the people have low income or no income at all. The same in the colonial times. And to use Fanon, it is just the color of the skin that has changed, that you have, a few Black people now who are able to amass a bit of wealth. The structure is still the same. A very small minority of people with wealth and income, and then the rest are poor. Those dualism still exist. They were much stronger, of course, in colonial times, but still exist today. The fourth feature of the colonial economy is capital flight. Money that was made by the Belgian king, Leopold II, in Congo, never stayed in Congo. It was always taken out. And today, we see this actually, there's several studies that have been done, that there's a lot of capital flight from the continent, some of it legally, through profit taking and dividend payment, but some of it illegally through transfer pricing and misinvoicing and all that. But the general picture is that Africa, therefore, it sends out more money than it receives in all other forms of inflows, including, ODA, portfolio investments, foreign direct investments, remittances, and so on and so forth. So it has remained a capital scarce continent. And as we speak, as a result of the COVID-19, most of the countries are actually in debt distress. And approaching the IMF for financial, for some loans. The fifth, feature of the surviving of the colonial economy, and is the looting of African resources. And the looting here is not just perhaps natural resources, but also the works of art. You probably, those of you have been following the story, that there have been now a movement to force some of the European nations to send back some of the artifacts, cultural artifacts that they stole from the continent. But the looting has continued in a very subtle form, not just of artifacts, but natural resources as well, including lands, the land grabs which we are witnessing. We thought that the phenomenon had died out after the 2009-2008 financial crisis, but actually the looting of land on the continent has continued in terms of land grabbing to today. So if that is the case, then what's the response? How do we transform? Because that's a big question. How do we transform these economies so that we stem off some of these negative effects on the continent? How do we transform the economies so that we orient them towards to generate more benefit for the African people? And here's where I think that one of the instruments we can use is what I'm referring to as a frontier industrial policy. And I speak to this in the last book because that's where I make the argument in more detail. So in the last chapter, that the frontier industrial policy, some of the key features should be to create dynamic comparative advantage. One of the central arguments of the colonial economic logic was to ride on a static comparative advantage. That has made us believe that Africa has no comparative advantage in producing computers or cars. And because Africa has no comparative advantage, then will remain like that. But a frontier industrial policy needs to change that and frame comparative advantage in dynamic terms. Take, for example, Japan. Japan had no comparative advantage in making cars, even as early as 1902 or 1920. But they created a comparative advantage, a dynamic comparative advantage through industrial policy, and became the largest car manufacturer in the world. So that's one example of reorienting or decentering the colonial economic logic. For the African countries, we have always bought into this idea that we have no comparative advantage in doing anything. Yes, comparative advantage might not exist now, but it can. A comparative advantage can be built over time, and this is where industrial policy comes in. And the other feature of a frontier industrial policy is that it has to think on the margins. It's not about going to do what Korea did or what Japan did, but it's asking ourselves today and say, what is it that we need to do for us to turn around this economy, to turn around the structure or the orientation of the African economy so that it benefits the people. And that requires thinking on the margin, hence the idea of a frontier industrial policy. It has to have an agile and ambitious step. Unfortunately here, unapologetically, I would affirm that you need a stronger state with strong institutions that support industrial policy to be able to implement a frontier industrial policy. I am also arguing, and I'll speak just in a minute, to a regional approach to industrial policy by developing and domesticating regional value chains. and then promoting peer learning. And I argue there that it's easier for Tanzania to learn from Rwanda and Morocco than to learn from Korea and Japan and Germany. So the role of regional industrial strategies, I think that's at the center of this, what I refer to as a collective strategy. And I quote there the ECA report of 2012 saying that, cooperation at the regional level is important because it encourages synergies, expands market, and it helps to establish linkages. Partly because African economies are slightly small, so to compete and break into global markets or global value chains at the higher value-added segments, it's very difficult. So the strategy is then to build regional value chains that can then be used as stepping stone once you build the industrial capabilities to be able to compete at the global level. We can't, ask Malawi to compete with South Korea in the production of cars. That's not possible. But if Malawi builds their capacity over time by relying on regional strategy, it's possible to do that. There've been earlier strategies at the continental level, and I've listed a couple of them there. Stemming, in the 80s with the Lagos Plan of Action, they proclaimed the first industrial development decade for Africa, in the second industrial development decade for Africa, the Alliance for the Industrialization of Africa, Accelerated Industrial Development for Africa, IDA, which is actually the current regime, and there are others, including the Agenda 2023. One would argue that nothing has come out of this. Yeah, and for sure, yes, there are challenges that are there. And I do argue that perhaps the biggest challenge for us is to find a solution to work together. Because at the regional level, individual countries will find it difficult to build industrial capacity for various reasons that I cannot go into now. But at regional level, or even at the continental level, it's possible. But working together has been problematic. That even two countries working together becomes a nightmare. As we speak, there are 4 of the 8 regional economic communities recognized by the AU that have regional industrial policies. But implementing even 5% of that has not happened. Some of them, the earliest one was, of course, ECOWAS. ECOWAS formulated the regional industrial policy in 2010, followed by the ECA, the East African Bloc in 2012, and SADC in 2015. But the implementation of that has remained just on paper. And perhaps I argue that we need to find a common enemy. So the idea is that we worked very well during the struggle to dislodge the colonial economy. There was unity. I was just reading a paper the other day that Nkrumah was donating 15 Land Rovers to the struggle in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, and so on. And one wonders, why is it that we can't do any form of uniting today to push an agenda where we dislodge the economic neo-colonial strategies? So perhaps a common enemy can be a rallying point for us to unite and move ahead. One thing that has captured the imagination of many people is African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which I am optimistic but also pessimistic, given the reasons that there's a lot that needs to be done for this to work. But if it works, it can be an important step forward. However, I still maintain the argument that this addresses the trade aspect, but it doesn't address the production side. You can trade things, but if you're not producing, it's not going to solve our problem. Our problem needs to address the production side of things, and complemented by a trade policy that can enhance the flow in the system and in the region. And in conclusion, I think that we, as a continent, we need a hard break with that colonial economic logic and it takes different forms, including industrial policy as a decolonial apparatus, as a decolonial tool, because the colonial logic was built on not producing or manufacturing on the continent. So if you have an industrial policy that promotes industrialization and the growth of the manufacturing sector, you're actually reversing that economic logic. Yeah. With those points, I think let me end there and then see if we have if there are any points that we can discuss. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Horman, for the talk. I know the book is so rich and so detailed, and I think you did a great job of pulling out some of the key ideas from the book and sharing them with us this afternoon. So let me hand over to Judith to offer a few remarks, and then we'll open it up more broadly.
Thank you very much. Let me first congratulate Horman for this fantastic book. It's been much needed, and it really fills a gap, I think, in our understanding of Zambia's economic trajectory and history of economic and social development. I did my PhD on Zambia, and I remember for at least until now, until recently, you couldn't find virtually any book on the history of Zambia that tried to explain not only so much like the colonial history and the implication for the current development of the country, but also potentially what the role of industrial policy could be in breaking this legacy and really moving past this legacy. So congratulations very much. And also let me thank Fiona and UJ for inviting me to share some reflections on this topic, which is very close to my heart. So overall, I think what your conclusions are very much correct. I fully agree with your conclusions. I think industrial policy, it's really one of the key policies, not the only one, but one of the key policies to break past the current levels of poverty, I would say, and economic stagnation in Zambia. And on my side, I think I would like to maybe share some reflection on what this policy should look like, what this industrial policy should look like. And I think you have really touched on some of the key issues. So if we look at the institutional capacity to design and to implement industrial policies in Zambia, I would say that one of my first observation is that we find a very strong imbalances between the level of institutional capacity you find in the different areas. So because of political reasons, traditionally, the department responsible for trade or the ministries responsible for finance or planning have tended to receive a lot of support from external donors. And the ministry and the department responsible for industrial development did not. So I think part of the problem is that from the institutional perspective, not only in terms of budget allocation, but really in terms of the expertise needed to design and implement this type of policies, there is a strong imbalance. And this is why over the years you have seen that Zambia has been much more present and proactive in the trade policy space. I think in the early 2000s, Zambia was also leading the LDC group within the WTO, so coordinating tens and tens of countries across all the continents on trade policy, vis-a-vis the capacity really on industrial policy. And there are historical reasons for that, of course, one of which is that with the establishment of the WTO, a lot of technical assistance was allocated to LDCs, and Zambia obviously benefited from that. But when it came later on to, that industrial policy has become now a priority for the country, it didn't have maybe the same, readiness to attract technical assistance, peer-to-peer learning, or staff to carry out these policies. This has also had implication together with the budgetary allocation, I think, with the actual implementation of these policies. So Zambia has had a trade and industrial policy at least since 2008 and 2009. This was reviewed. It was the commercial trade and industrial policy. It was then reviewed in 2014 with a new policy. And in 2018, as I'm sure Horman knows, these have been now separated. So there is a trade policy, there's an industrial policy, and there's also a local content policy. And obviously the biggest question mark is on how far did we go on the implementation of all these policies. And that for me, I think it's one of the crucial aspect of this problem. It's very difficult to succeed or to make mistakes and learn from our mistakes and move past these mistakes, etc. If, you know, as policymakers, we don't actually get engaged sufficiently with the implementation of these policies, let alone with monitoring the success of these policies. And I think the implementation gap to me remains one of the key challenges when we talk about industrial policies. I want to go back to the issue of expertise, because I think this remains one of the most striking feature, I think. Horman, you mentioned the relevance of the importance of the mining sector in the development of in the socio-economic development of Zambia. And obviously the mining sector, I mean, I know there are a lot of pessimists out there on what, you know, the resource sector can do for economic transformation and industrial development. I happen to be one of the optimists, or one of the positive people, because I think the experience of other countries, very often outside of Africa, has actually shown that you can use the resource sector to industrialize and to diversify. So one of the key questions is, why has Zambia not done this? And part of it, I think it's political. It's about the power of, vested interest of, in particular, the mining companies in this effort. And part of that was also, I think, has been also historically related to the lack of political will or of the government in pursuing a value addition and diversification strategy. And the fact that, for example, within the ministries, different ministries are in charge of the mining sector, of trade and industrial policy, etc., there was so little expertise in relation to this, in relation to the beneficiation industries, the inputs industries to the mining sector, to really drive a local content, an effective local content strategy or a beneficiation strategy, etc., remain one of the key question marks. And that also goes to touch on one other topic you mentioned, which is obviously with taxation and revenues. So because Zambia has, is really not taken advantage as much as it could have from a revenue perspective of the mining sector. I remember in the years in which I was living in Zambia, so it was during the commodity price boom. The Zambia Revenue Authority had only, I think, 2 or 3 people that were actually expert in mining taxation. And you can compare these with the level of expertise within the mining companies in negotiating with the Zambian government on the mining taxation regime. And that's obviously, that obviously says also a lot, I think, on the future of industrial strategy. I think Zambia should still try to maximize the opportunities for industrial development linked to the mining sector. But I don't think that can be done, of course, without the right expertise in the engineering sector, in the capital equipment sector, in the beneficiation sector, and so forth. Another key issue, I think, it's in relation to the coordination of different policies. It's very difficult to talk about an effective industrial policy if this is not coordinated with the trade policy, with the skills development policy, with the investment policy. So just to give you an example, unless this has changed recently, at the moment, different companies would really be lack completely any incentive to invest in any value addition in relation to not only to mining, but also to sugar and other key industries. Because, for example, even if the industrial policy would try to provide incentive for them to invest in assembly operations, for example, or in other forms of value addition compared to importing finished products. The lead firms, for example, it was the sugar, it was Zambia Sugar, but also the mining companies, etc., received provision within their investment agreements, bilateral investment agreements, which allowed them to import duty-free all the finished products. So obviously for them, there was no incentive at the time to procure from local companies, from local Zambian companies that were facing 15% on intermediate inputs. And that's a similar story with some of the tariffs, whereby there would be at 0% for finished capital products and 15% for intermediate inputs. So again, providing no incentive whatsoever for anyone to invest in any assembly point, in any assembly operation. So in that respect, I think the lack of coordination, which is driven obviously by different bargaining powers between governments and different private sector companies, has created a massive problem to actually, for any industrial policy or local content policy to be effective. And then the other issue is on the skills development, where I think it's very difficult to talk about investment in local value added industry and technological upgrading, etc., if the skills development strategy is not matching the ambition of Zambia on industrial development. And I think the role of TEVETA, the local authority in charge of technical and vocational skills, has always been really underestimated and marginalized in this regard. And it has been disregarded by the different ministries and also large investors who don't necessarily have always an interest in investing in local skills development. Another issue that I think has been interesting over the years is to see how Zambia has been, I think now, as the perspective on industrial policies have changed a lot over the past 10 years. And this is why Zambia now has a standalone industrial policy. And this is, I think it's something that we see across the continent. And together with the mining sector, obviously the other key source of demand to leverage in order to promote industrialization has been with regard to government procurement. I think that would be obviously another interesting one. And I'm currently doing a lot of work in government procurement, and I see the growing interest of governments to try to leverage government procurement to promote local value addition, local industries. And I was very happy to see that in 2018, with the local content policy, Zambia has been has addressed one of the key misalignment, I would say, between the previous efforts to promote local content and to use strategically government procurement through the Citizens Economic Empowerment Act and the industrialization strategy. And that was with regard to this conflation of local content with national ownership. For many years, the attempt to use local content in the mining sector and strategic government procurement have really focused on national ownership, Zambian ownership, and that has not always equated local value addition and local production. So the end result may be that you just end up basically supporting a small group of well-connected importing companies with no significant investment in employment or local technological upgrading, etc. And I see that this has been addressed finally in 2018. I don't know how far Zambia has gone with the implementation of this, but I think this is very important, and this is a significant, I think, achievement in any strategy for local industrialization. The other, I think, three aspects of these in relation to any local content policy or strategic use of government procurement or industrial policy, I think, remain on the enforcement side. I mentioned before the implementation, but really the capacity also for the government to track with an effective monitoring and evaluation system how far the targets are being achieved year by year. And I think so far, there is progress is needed, let's say, in this area. The other issue is, I think, sometimes this difficult relationship with the private sector, which has been either antagonistic or maybe conceding too much too easily. And I think it's important maybe for the future of Zambia's industrialization strategy to strike a balance. Horman, you mentioned the issue of a big role for the governments. I think it's important to have an effective role for the governments. I think the size of the government intervention will very much depend country by country and sector by sector. I don't think we have a one size fits all that works across, everyone. What worked for Korea doesn't necessarily work for Zambia. And I think so. I think it will depend very much on the sector. I think it will have to be nimble and adaptive, and really with a lot of expertise within government to really understand how to design the most effective strategies and how to adapt and change and learn. And how to also leverage, may I say, complementary policy measures to make sure that whatever we ask the private sector to do, for example, on local content, can actually succeed. The last aspect is in terms of new imperatives. So in 2022, we know that digitalization and environmental sustainability will become critical component of any industrialization strategy, and that has a lot of implications, both from the policy perspective, but also from the investment perspective, whether it's in infrastructure or the type of investors Zambia should attract in the country, but also in terms of the type of trade policy or domestic regulatory frameworks that are put in place. I don't think anyone today seriously thinks that we can develop local industries without taking into account of these two imperatives. And at the same time, obviously, this is an opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge because entire supply chains are being reconfigured because of these two imperatives. I like very much hearing about regional value chains and regional industrialization. As you mentioned, there are a number of regional industrialization strategies that didn't really materialize. For example, the SADC one. They really didn't translate into any game-changing, intervention in how governments cooperate on this. I think the biggest challenge would really be to create a win-win. So I don't see this so much in terms of, potentially rallying everyone against a common external enemy. I mean, to the extent that we are reading the common external enemy, I think it's poverty and stagnation and the industrialization. I think the key issue here is how to create a common strategy, a shared strategy, making sure that also the least developed countries, the landlocked countries, etc., see a big advantage, a big win for them. And obviously the FCFTA is the next big opportunity, but this is, as you mentioned, and I fully agree with you, it's a trade agreement. It's not an industrial policy program. So there's only so much you can do with, for example, restrictive rules of origin if there's no simultaneous investment in local production capacity, on standards, on ensuring that the right inputs at the right volume, but of the right quality are supplied to your upstream industries. So at the moment, there's no answer yet. And I don't know if the answer is only with the FCFTA, or it should be led maybe by other instruments of the African Union. But I think the next maybe year or 2 years will be definitely critical in this regard. I think there are also important dynamics happening outside Africa that will obviously have a bearing on the success of a regional industrialization strategy. Within the WTO, there are a lot of discussions on how to change the rule to accommodate a more active and interventionist industrial policy. But there's also a standstill. And I mean, that's, for political reasons, between the North and China, and now with Russia, etc. So I don't see a lot of progress happening there. But because of that, other regions have moved forward with the regional trade agreements and mega regionals. And I think it's, I think it's these regional agreements that will really shape the future competition for Africa, because these are deep regional trade agreements where countries have even moved beyond the WTO in disciplining government procurement and the digital economy and the movement of people, etc. So I think that will be really the benchmark for Africa's own regional trade and industrialization strategy, to see how competitive it can be and how successful it can be really in creating regional integrated industries, which I think is the future for, should be the future for Africa's poverty elimination strategy. I think that's it. These were only some comments which I hope were useful. And that's it. I'll give you back the floor. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you again, Horman, for this brilliant contribution to our understanding of Africa's and Zambian economic development in particular. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you very much to you, Judith, for the very pertinent and thought-provoking comments. We'll now open for a Q&A discussion. I think we can start with the couple of questions that have already been posted in the chat here. And then to people who are attending, if you would like to speak, maybe you can just raise your hand, and the hosts of the meeting will be able to enable speaking, so we can have a more interactive session. So perhaps Horman, you'd like to comment, and feel free, Judith, as well, if you would like to share anything on the questions which have been posted. Wendani has asked a couple of questions relating to innovation and R&D. So he's asked what's the difference between frontier industrial policy and the national system of innovation concept as the guide for transformation. And related to that, he's asking what is the role of R&D and innovation in frontier industrial policy, and what's the role of inbound in international technology transfer in developing industrial capabilities. And then Vota has suggested that perhaps the key is improving our processes and institutions supporting regional industrial policy making, also at the national level, and any suggestions as to how this can be achieved. And then David has asked a question which I think is not visible to participants more widely, but around non-working institutions with a little technocracy to effectively implement policies, and perhaps this is where we are falling short. So yeah, back to you, Horman, to give your reactions to those.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Judith. So I'll speak, to some of the comments that have come up, and I'll start with, I think the first one on what's the difference between a frontier industrial policy and research and development and innovation. So the shortest answer to that is that research and development should be a core component of a frontier industrial policy, in the sense that industrialization would be driven by strong capabilities in research and development and innovation. And innovation for technology that is suitable for Africa to create a dynamic comparative advantage, because that's the crux of the matter. It's not about staying where we are, but it's thinking, where do we want to be and what do we use to be able to get to where we want. And Judith mentioned, the digital economy and so on. So industrial policy, that's on the margins of industrial policy, has to think of how to incorporate that as one of the pillars. And then in terms of institutions, I think that is where the big question is. And you know, both at the national level, but also at the supranational level, whether it's regional or at the AU level. We of course, we have been doing some work on, you know, what are the industrial policy institutions on the continent that support the development of industrialization. And what's coming out there is that two things. One is that there is, in cases where there's capacity, there's general lack of capacity, both, you know, technical, but also research and the formulation. If you look at some of the industrial policies that have come out, they are so general and vague, because an industrial policy sometimes can have, you know, should be able to give you a sense of where this is going. Yeah. So even at the level of just formulating policy, there are capacity issues. But the other area where capacity is lacking is around coordination. Again, Judith mentioned and emphasized coordination as critical, because industrial policy, you know, touches on many other things for it to succeed. You'll have to have the skills training, you have to have the tax system, you have to have, you know, to sync those, you need a very strong institutional capacity that can coordinate those to enhance its contribution to industrialization. And coordination has been problematic. And you know, not just you know, across the board. So we looked at South Africa, we looked at Rwanda, we looked at Kenya, Morocco, and almost similar things coming out. That there is lack of a strong institutional anchoring that has the ability to call shots as you like, because the you know, when you're promoting industrial policy, you've got to link with the people in the digital or innovation sector, and give them your view of what they need to contribute. You've got to link to people in trade. You've got to link to people in treasury, and so on and so forth. For example, the procurement, government everywhere are, you know, are the big procurers of anything. Now, if you're promoting in the local industrialization and then you're procuring uniforms from China for nurses, you know, it really just sees, that's a classic example of disconnect. Because if there are local companies that can manufacture the uniforms, even if it's at a slightly cost, but you're creating capability, you're building capacity for them to compete. But you find that even police uniform, police boots and shoes are procured from outside. For a country like Kenya that can that has a lot of leather and that can be converted into boots. So when you speak to those people, they will tell you, but that department, you know, they don't listen to us. And that's a classical case of lack of coordination, but also lack of institutional anchoring for industrial policy, because it needs a strong institutional anchoring that can have the, you know, the ability to be able to call others to follow or to join, to complement what they're doing. I think and then and also on sustainability. Again, I think a frontier industrial policy, you know, as Judith mentioned, has to ask where we are and where we want to go. So it's not, and one of the things that it has to consider is how do we develop industries that will not contribute or exacerbate climate change. So it's not like reproducing, you know, industries with smokestacks, but it's reproducing smart industries that you know, would navigate the challenges of climate change. And I think that that component is a challenge, but it is central to any successful industrial policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Horman. Kwasi has indicated he would like to ask a question. Go ahead, Kwasi.
Thank you for the opportunity given to me. My name is Fessehaie, a PhD student of University of Cape Town, and Prof happens to be my supervisor. But I really enjoyed the presentation, and it appears to be like he's writing about my country, which is Ghana, because most of the features of the economy, most of the issues raised appears to be the same across board. I have only two issues to ask. One has to do with the altering of the structures of competitive advantage. When you look at the issue of competitive advantage, recently there was a discussion in Ghana regarding importation of cassava from China. And the Minister of Agriculture, in one of his responses was that it was even cheaper getting the cassava from China than even to produce it in Ghana. Sometimes some of these issues are the issues that are raised as a basis of depending on imported goods instead of engaging in industrial production locally. How can we go around some of these issues once we are thinking of frontier industrial policy? Then the second issue has to do with the role of the state. With the liberalization of African economy through the structural adjustment, much of the role of the state was relegated to the background because the state was made to withdraw from the market arena. And with the introduction of democratization, there appears to have the role of the states appear to be waning with time. Now the social media and the cyclical elections has reduced most states into depending on the majority to win votes. So sometimes governments in power don't even implement the policies of the state, but rather implements the agendas of the parties they represent to give them the opportunity to come again. And for that matter, even within the nation, some of them are not able to have a formulated industrial policy they are following. A classical example is Ghana. The current government is doing one district, one factory project. And it doesn't seem to be a project that is of interest to the major opposition party. So for all you know, the next time the opposition party wins power, that laudable agenda might not also work. So even at the regional, national level, if we are not able to coordinate some of these things with a strong state, how are we able to do that at the top national level, at the regional context? I think these are the major issues I wanted to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kwasi. I think we will collect the remaining questions so that Horman can respond to them all together. Santos, can the host please enable Santos to speak? And in the meantime, I'll also just draw attention to the question which Francis has posted in the chat around really the political economy of industrial policy. Why might politicians be interested in implementing industrial policy when they can remain in power by controlling extractive industries? An interesting question there. Santos, go ahead with your question.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, Santos, PhD student. I just wanted to say that the issue of existence of the features of colonization is still really a bad thing. Africa. And this France helping Rwanda to help Mozambique.
Sorry, Santos, I think we lost you for a moment there. Can I ask?
Hello?
Yeah, Can you, go ahead, Santos. I think you might just need to mute yourself because there's an echo, but go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was saying that France actually helps Rwanda for Rwanda to help Mozambique. So it's a matter of, ensuring that their own interests are still reflecting in our own countries, But then to ask a bit of question regarding the competitive advantages, I wanted to ask Prof, how can we ensure that, agriculture is integrated to industrial policy in order to turn, all our resources competitive when we go to a global market, because we cannot have like the comparative advantages. For example, if we invest more in trade policies, but then we don't produce, as you said, and the production comes exactly from agricultural sector. Is there a way we can ensure that those two sectors are integrated? In other words, to come from the theory into practical way of doing things and get to that thing. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And over to Lewis for your question.
Good afternoon to everyone. Yes, I wanted to comment on the role of the local content requirements. So in Zambia, for example, the recent study that was done on the mining sector shows that out of the annual expenditure of about $4 billion that the mine spends on goods and services that are available locally, only 10% of that amount is directed towards locally produced goods and services. And I was seeing from the presentation, especially on the graph that was talking about the percentage of commodities in our exports, which was high, I think somewhere above 60%. And I'm looking at this mining sector that we have as an entry point to grow our manufacturing sector. Because if we start, selling to the mines, even just to move from 10% to 50, that means that we'll be getting about $2 billion. It's enough for us to build the local capacities of the manufacturing sector, to then explore the regional markets and then the international markets, and then we might be able to change those ratios. That's my comment. If that's a viable strategy to, change the colonial economy picture that Zambia currently depicts.
Thanks, Lewis. I was thinking we'd collect a few questions, but as we go, the questions keep multiplying. So it's great to see the interest in the talk. I think let's just take all of them so that Horman can respond, even though it will be a big job. Chengi, you can go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Horman, for your insightful presentation. I note that there is a missing component, or maybe I didn't get it. You are speaking of Zambia, and what is happening in Zambia actually can be found in most of the countries in the continent of Africa. And what I found missing maybe is how to tackle as well the prevalence of the informality in the African countries. More so, as you commented that you don't see the FCFTA or maybe being able to deliver on its mandate of industrialization. And as we know, industrialization is actually key in creating jobs on the continent. And by creating jobs on the continent, maybe in a way, we're going to have a lot of, most people maybe migrating towards formality. And how then do we actually opt the informal sector, which I'm afraid forms the largest component of sectors within Africa? How does the IP hope to actually co-opt this significant dividend of the informal sector in order to achieve industrialization? Thank you.
Thank you, Chengi. And I think the last question is from Alexis in the chat. I think it's visible to everybody, so I won't take time reading it out. It's a comment and a question. It's got to go back to Horman. I know you might not be able to deal with everything. I think some of them is also just people's views, and it's great that your talk has provoked those views. So go ahead.
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, so I won't be able to comment. To answer all of them, but let me start with Kwasi's example of Ghana importing cassava from China. That sounds very strange, but it's happening. And whatever, I mean, of course, I mean, if you apply the dry principle of comparative advantage, China could be producing at a cheaper price, could be producing cassava at a cheaper price than Ghana. But in the context of industrial policy, you would want to begin building capacity for Ghana to produce cassava locally, because and I've been to Ghana, the cassava is grown, is one of the most popular grown crops. And so it defeats any logic that you would be importing it from China. Even if you import from China today and next year, but have a strategy to overturn that disadvantage by perhaps supplying people with a more modern variety of cassava, or addressing the constraints. Why is it that China will have a more competitive advantage, including the fact that they can ship it over so many thousands of miles to Ghana? They still produce at the lower. Of course, I mean, there are other things that they will have more machine, but that's what industrial policy can work to say, if they have sophisticated machine, how can we build that? If their production is much better, how can we support the local? And you might not be able to overturn that comparative advantage or competitive advantage over 2 years, but you have a plan to say, this doesn't make sense. Why should we importing rice? Should be importing, why Mozambique importing rice from Mexico doesn't make sense. But that could be perpetuated, and I think Judith touched on it, that there's, and it touches on the political economy question, that they sometimes, that arrangement could benefit the political elite, that their commitment to importing cassava might have more benefits than growing cassava locally, and sometimes it can survive that way, because it totally doesn't make any sense, especially in the context of industrial policy. And then the role of the state. Yes, of course, the state, that is part of the problem that we are noticing, that during the structure adjustment programs, the state was rolled back, as if you like. And in some cases, it was hollowed out of the capacity that was developed by downsizing the civil service, because the public wage was getting bigger, and putting African economies into serious problems with the IMF. The result of that is that we lost capacity. But at the moment, and again, as Judith mentioned, most African countries are designing industrial policy, and they are realizing that to implement this, they need to build capacity. Now, of course, the capacity at the moment is low in most countries, but there is a realization that if we are to make progress, we need to build capacity that we lost. So that's an important critical point, I think, that we have mentioned already, that to implement any form of industrial policy that can be effective, you need capacity at the institutional level. And I think that doing that also requires, what question we are not addressing is actually the political benefit for the elite, because policy is made by politicians. Most of us speak about policy, we analyze it, but at the end of the day, it's politicians. So we've got to analyze what drives politicians to make policy, but also to commit to its fulfillment. That needs, I think, further research to understand why is it that they would come up with a very, like for instance, South Africa, very progressive industrial policy and the strategic plan, but the coordination and the implementation, the carrying through has been very weak, even as we speak. So the question of agriculture and how do we integrate that with industrial policy? That's a brilliant question. So for industrial policy in the past, building industrial capacity has relied on processing agricultural products. And so the link, between agriculture and is almost natural, that the first steps of industrialization are your cotton, your food processing. They help you build capacity into medium and high-tech segments of the technology ladder. And agriculture plays an important role. Not only that, but for the African continent, agriculture should be very central for two reasons. One is that majority of the people are working there, outside of South Africa and other countries. You have almost 65% in the agriculture sector and subsistence. So if you can, lift productivity there, even by 10%, 20%, you can't imagine what it would do in terms of poverty reduction. It's massive. And secondly, the rising population on the continent would require a sophisticated agriculture system to feed the population. At the moment, we are net importers of 35% of cereal that we are consuming. In fact, that's projected to rise to almost 45% by 2030. And as the population grows, we need to revamp our agriculture system because we won't feed people. When we hit 1.5 million and 2.5 billion by 2050, we will need to re-engineer our agriculture system, and that would require also that we also address the input side, which is the industrial production for agriculture implements. Whether it is your inputs, in terms of for preparation of fields, your seed, processes, that connection has to be there, and they are complementary. You can't have a very successful industrialization policy with a very weak agriculture policy, and history has actually we have that evidence from history. And then the local content policy. Yes, so the local content policy has been, has come in the media as a central tool and part of the industrial policy for advancing the growth of domestic manufacturing, production, and industry, but also value addition in general. So, and in several countries, it has been framed in different ways. But in the Zambian context, so the problem has been twofold. First of all, for you to have a successful local content policy, you've got to produce, you've got to be able to address the constraint in the local supply or suppliers. Here's a scenario. I mean, if I want to supply mining tools or let's say, for example, a simple thing, the mining company wants ores to build, tunnels underground. If I am a local supplier, if I don't have the capacity to deliver the right quality of the building ores, it doesn't make sense for the government to say we have local content policy without ensuring that there are local firms that are capacitated to be able to deliver the mining sector. Secondly, for the local content policy to be successful, you will need a monitoring system. Again, that's a weakness of capacity because usually we like for Zambia, they have said 35% of the procurement in the mine should come from local suppliers. And the question is who monitors that? And how do you assess that? There's also a question of how do you categorize which one is. There are local suppliers that are actually international companies. So we need to address those, particularly I think on the capacity side, because for the local content policy to be successful, you need to have capable suppliers that can supply the right quantity, the right quality, and even in the right price, but also the aspect of reliability. Because if I've given you a contract to supply me, food for the mining sector or whatever, and then at some point, the local supplier comes to me and says, look, I can't find milk anywhere else in the country. That derails everything, and it allows these guys to use that as an excuse to procure from outside the country. Yeah, so local content policy is good, but we have work to do in order to address the constraints. the point about informality and job creation on the continent. So in terms of industrial policy, again, there was a study that was done by the World Bank in 2017, and it discovered that actually across the continent, we have a huge base of informal manufacturing. And, you know, it's operating in the informal sector, in light manufacturing in particular. And the study was suggesting that, you know, we need to understand how that sector works so that you can perhaps use it and also promote, you know, further deepening of industrial sector, but also upgrading of some of those promising, because some of them are informal, but they can actually, with a bit of, you know, support of different forms, be upgraded, and because they understand the local, you know, industry where they are supplying. So, and I don't think that it's a very feasible, you know, strategy to promote the migration for companies that grow. Yes, they can become, you know, formal, but, you know, you've got to nurture the informal sector as a necessary for growing bigger manufacturing sector with appropriate support. And of course that is critical, and they provide jobs, most of these informal sector. In some cases, even up to 60% of some light manufacturing, including manufacturing of furniture, clothing, and so on, is done in the informal sector. And that's a huge base to begin to build. An industrial policy needs to understand what are the dynamics there. Thank you.
Thanks, Horman. I think we are actually out of time, so we won't be able to take any more questions and comments. But it's great to see the interest in the ideas coming from the book, and I know that Horman is currently editing another book focused on the Zambian economy. So watch this space. And for those who are interested in reading further about the book that he based his talk on today, the details are in the flyer for this event, including a code for a discount. So please go ahead and support the book sales. So let me, in closing, well, thank you to you, Horman, for coming to share your ideas and talk about the book this afternoon. Thank you to Judith for your really cogent remarks on the book, and yeah, to everybody who has raised questions and comments in this afternoon's talk, as well as to the team from SART Industrial Development and from the UJ Library that put this event together successfully. So we will leave it there. I see a question, sorry, that is it available in South African bookstores? I think it's available for online purchase. Horman, is that right? Is it available in any bookstores? I see somebody asking.
No, so the books by Routledge, yeah, they're not available locally. So you have to, but they're available on Amazon or any other online platforms.
Yeah, and in the flyer for this event, there's a link to click on, I think, to order the book and the discount code. Yeah. So we will close it there, and let me also just remind people that next Wednesday, we SART Industrial Development, together with the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at WITS, are hosting the launch of the Oxford Handbook of the South African Economy. And the keynote speaker at the event will be President Cyril Ramaphosa. And we'll also be having messages from the Vice Chancellors of UJ and WITS. It's next Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. and hopefully everybody who's here has also received the information about that. If not, you can contact any of the organizers, and we would love to have people joining there. So let me close the event and wish everybody well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Horman. Thank you, Fiona.